Yeah, I just wanted to talk today. There's been a lot of news about the Bundys lately. Um, and I just want to talk about basically the Bundys, the Hammonds, the Finicums, how that all ties in with the Constitution. Because the other night I turned a video on from the Young Turks, and he's screaming and hollering, saying that the Bundys got white privilege because they were dismissed from the trial. They were found not guilty. And I look at that, and I look at a report come out the next day saying, well, the Bundys still owe $1 million. And people are so, people just take the time to study and to dig in and see what the Constitution says and where the government stands, where the people stand. Remember that not only is this a constitutional republic, but also this is by the people for the people. And when the government goes rogue and doesn't listen to the people and doesn't work with the people, then it's no longer a government by the people for the people. And that means that what the government's doing is illegal for them to do that. They've gone rogue. And so I decided to talk about this tonight because I've studied in depth about the Bundys all the way from the siege there, well, siege, they call it siege, armed occupation, that's all just a bunch of names, but down in the Bunkerville there in Nevada, they come in, they told the Bundys that they owed them grazing fees, and they started racking these grazing fees up, and then they started trying to convince everybody that they were grazing their cattle illegally. I would hope that people would go and do some research, because the Bundys had the grazing rights to that area, to those allotments. What does that mean exactly? Well, the Bundys were there long before the BLM even existed. Their family's been there a long time. And under their agreements that they had, they owned the grass that was on that private land. They owned the watering systems. They had developed those watering systems. And then here comes the BLM along, who, by the way, check your Constitution. In Section 1, Article 8 of the Constitution, it clearly says the federal government cannot own land. That the federal government can buy up territories, and they can own that territory until that's made into a state. And at the time that that's made into a state, that land is to be turned over to that state. And the federal government has been out of line ever since they made the western states, because they claim all this land out here that's not theirs. There's also an equal footing. When the federal government was, when they were created, and the federal government is a creation of the states, they said equal footing clause, that when new states were created, that they would have all the same rights and privileges as the state as the original 13 colonies. So Mr. Bundy knew this, and he went to the county and he says, you know what, I'm going to pay these grazing fees to you because this land belongs to the state. Is there anything wrong with that? Well, some may argue back and forth, but he's speaking the truth. That the way that the public land is supposed to work is that that land does not belong to the state, it belongs to the citizens of that state. And the grazing fees and timber cutting and all that kind of stuff on those public lands is supposed to go to pay for roads and schools and different things of that sort. And that has not been done. So you can argue back and forth whether Mr. Bundy was in the wrong, or you can say, well, this is just the way it is today. What do you want? Do you want to go by the rule book, or do you want to just do whatever the government says? These guys are not bad guys. They're just guys that drew a line in the sand, and they said, this is where we're drawing our line, and that's where this is going to stop. So I want you to think about how the government acted in this. And then if you really sit and think about it and still tell me that the Bundys are the ones in the wrong, maybe you don't deserve to even live in this country, because they here was BLM come in and they said, okay, we've got these grazing fee assessments, and whatever they were doing is, that's neither here nor there. And they took the Bundys to court, and of course it went to a federal court and not a state or county court. And of course the federal government says, oh yeah, no, you have to pay these. But what the government did next is unacceptable. It should be unacceptable to every single American that lives in this country. When you get a court order, that court order is supposed to be initiated by the county sheriff. It doesn't matter what court it comes from. The county sheriff is to deliver that court order to whoever that court order is against, and take action from there. They come in to confiscate his cows and to auction them off. Just to come in and confiscate them and auction them off. They come in with guns blazing. They come in with snipers. They had helicopters. They had drones. They had earth-moving equipment. And they come into his ranch. They killed some of his cattle. They started ripping out the water systems that had been there forever. It doesn't matter if it's public land. Those water systems belong to the Bundys. They did not. The government had no reason to do that. Even if they had a court order to go and arrest him and put him in prison, they still had no right to tear those water systems out and to kill his cattle, or to confiscate those cattle and auction them off. But what really should make people upset about that was the little crowded off area that they made, that they called the First Amendment zone. And they started giving people a bad time if they weren't in that little zone area to speak their mind, basically. So they started knocking people down and tasing them, the people that were out protesting. And finally the militia come in and protected Mr. Bundy. And then they had to stand off where it come right down to it. If the BLM officers, they were surrounded. Was there guns there? Yes. But one thing I want to be very clear about is Mr. Bundy himself said we don't need guns to win this war. And I don't recall him carrying a gun. I wasn't there. I don't know for sure. But all of the film footage of him, I haven't seen him packing a gun around. Okay? And so the BLM, and think about it, they're a land management group to start with. They're not a law enforcement group. Where do they get off making it a war zone down there when it should have been taken care of by the local sheriff? So they backed off the BLM, and then Ammon and his brother find out about the Hammonds up in Oregon. And here's a family that simply, there was a fire burning towards their property. So they lit a fire. And those of you that aren't familiar with it, they light these backfires that burns the brush off in the other direction. So when the main fire comes up, it doesn't have any fuel to continue on, and it will stop the fire. Well, in the process of doing that, they burnt a very small section of BLM and helped stop this fire. The BLM gets all ticked off, comes marching in there, telling them that they're a bunch of arsonists. They take them to court, and they get a jail sentence. And when they get out of jail, they tell them that that's not good enough. And so they take them back to court, and they put them in jail for a longer period of time. This is unprecedented. When can you get arrested a second time after you've already done your jail time and be put back in prison for the same crime? Unbelievable. So Ammon and Ryan, and they're good men to do this, went up there and they said, we're not putting up with this. And so they went out and they went to the wildlife refuge and stayed there. And, you know, they kept calling it from the very beginning an armed occupation. And I, watching the film footage, and I was on the phone with some of the reporters there, I'm sure those guys had guns with them because, you know what, out here in the West, just about everybody packs guns. It's our constitutional right under the Second Amendment to have a gun with us. But I never once seen them pull out those guns and threaten the government. In fact, what I saw was them marching down to the sheriff's office. I saw them marching over to the FBI compound and trying to educate those people about the Constitution. Now, where you saw the footage of some of them standing up and saying, well, if they come in here, we're gonna shoot them, that was not until after Finicum had been murdered by the FBI, and those people were there protecting themselves. And I don't blame them for having that kind of an attitude. So after they'd been there a while, and basically, I mean, what charges was there really against them? Maybe breaking and entering into the building that they were in? What about illegal camping? I mean, there was no evidence that they stopped anybody from doing their job or anything of that sort. And as a matter of fact, the day that they were heading over to John Day, Oregon, to go talk to the sheriff over there on the day when they were ambushed. And it's been proven that that ambush was an illegal ambush up in that canyon, that they'd set up that roadblock on a blind corner, which people could have gotten hurt, even worse. It was a total setup, and the boy Finicum was definitely murdered by the FBI. And so then they take the rest of them, they put them in jail. And if you have followed along with the trial, and there's been a lot of information about that recently, what a circus. You know, the judge says, well, you cannot quote the Constitution of the United States in here. She dismissed most of their evidence that they had to protect themselves. And in the process of all of that, they were still found not guilty. And the government was so out of line. And you think about this. Here, his attorney gets up and he says, hey, you know what? If you're going to hold these guys, show me the paperwork that says that you can keep those people, you know, Ammon and Ryan, in jail. And here's the people that were just found not guilty. They're holding them in jail so that they can go down to Nevada for the next trial. And just because he told the judge that, they tackle him to the ground, they tase him, and they put him in jail. And, you know, if we're going to start attacking all of our lawyers just because they say, hey, show me the paperwork, what kind of country do we live in? When it all comes right down to it, just think about this. If we're a country where our government is by the people, for the people, why are we letting our media sway public opinion so that everybody thinks that these ranchers are a bunch of deadbeats, people that don't take the time to go out and study? And how can the government get away with such heinous stuff that they're doing, like bringing in armored vehicles and all this kind of stuff, when those guys were not shooting at anybody? They were not, I mean, it was ridiculous. It was way overkill. When are the people going to wake up and look at the government and say, you know what, you're right, you have to answer to us. You need to answer to us. You need to treat people decent. We need to work out these issues without threat of an armed military coming in to mow everybody down. We should never have to call on our good patriots in this country to have to take arms and go somewhere to protect innocent people from our own government. So, like I've said in a lot of my videos, it's time for everybody to get off their butt, start going to meetings, start showing up at you know, even city council meetings and things like that, and start making that government accountable to us. Take the time to study the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and know what your freedoms are. I see people all the time. I talk to them about what their freedoms and what their rights are, and they just say, oh, this is this and that's that. No. There are some tools that you have to make sure that those freedoms can be kept. One is a recall petition. If somebody gets in office and they consistently pass laws that are unconstitutional, or even a judge who's elected to that position, if he rules unjustly, the people have the right to recall that person from that elected position. There's also jury nullification, which happened in this case, where the jurors say, you know what, we understand what the government's trying to do here, but this is unconstitutional, and therefore we will nullify this case. The people have the right to that. And it goes on and on and on. And yes, we could even recall somebody like President Obama, who's been in office, as long as we get enough signatures. There could be a recall petition even against the government, or the President of the United States, or any other government official. And it's about time that we start doing those kind of things, that we can bring the freedoms back to this country, that we don't fear our own government from reprisals, that we don't let them destroy our businesses, because that's what was happening down in Nevada. There was something like 50 other ranches that left that area because of government persecution. They're destroying our way of life. They're destroying our businesses. They're making it so that people can't stay in business anymore through regulation and taxes. It's time for us to turn the tides on that. So, and I could go on and on all night about this, but I think you get my point. Thank you.